Welcome. We have come to the end of this 4-part course on phase field modeling. So, this is a good time to try to understand phase field models at a slightly broader perspective. So, this lecture is to give the idea about what phase field modeling is. Now that we have done everything starting from classical diffusion equation, their failure, writing Cahn-Hilliard equation, writing Allen-Cahn equation and using them by themselves or in combination to solve many of the problems that one can see that are related to microstructural evolution. So, it is a good time to step back and look at what these phase field models are and how to understand them. So, this presentation is a very short presentation, it is a sort of summary presentation and a little bit abstract in its tone. So, now that we have gone through the course and we have looked at several examples, so many of these things should make sense to you. So, let us go through this thing. So, this is about the viewpoints, the challenges and what can one do beyond what we have done in this course. So, that is what this short module is about. Before I do that, I have to thank several people. I have learnt phase field modeling from my thesis advisor Professor Abhinandanan, and I have spent some time in Germany and in US with Professor Ferdinand Haider and Professor Peter Voorhees. So, they are my teachers in phase field models, and while I was doing PhD and while I was doing my work with Peter in US for example. So, I had several colleagues from whom I have learnt lots about phase field modeling. So, this includes Rajdeep, whose grain boundary grooving work we discussed, Arko and Ian, who did grain growth problem with me, and Pani, Shankara, Deep. Deep is the one who wrote the first phase field thesis in this country, and Shashwato and Ram. So, those were my colleagues in different places, and then I had several collaborators, Kwan, with whom we had done some work related to grain boundary grooving, and Professor Chandrasekhar and Professor Meera Mitra here at IIT Bombay, with whom we worked on implementing numerically solving phase field equations using wavelets, and Professor Preeta Pant, who is my colleague, with whom we are trying to now do problems like plasticity induced microstructural evolution using phase field models. And of course, all of this is not possible unless you have students. So, I have a whole bunch of students. Amul is the first student to do phase field models in the lab, then Jayatirth, then Nani and Arijit and Kamlakshi, because they are the current PhD students who are doing the phase field modeling related work now in the group, and they are also the TAs for this course. So, they are there, and I have taught this course on microstructural evolution modeling. So, several batches of students took the course. They gave me their feedback, and most of the teaching material is based on my interaction with them. So, that helped me understand what works, what does not work, which is a good starting point, and how to go about doing the course. So, I would like to thank them, and at various stages I have been funded from DST, Government of India, and from industry, Tata Steel for example, and from IIT Bombay, the Industrial Research and Consultancy Center for example. So, I would like to thank them, and all this recording and lectures and the course would also have not been possible, but for the help for the MOOC team that we have here at IIT Bombay. So, I would like to thank them also. So, this is as far as the acknowledgements are. So, lots of people are involved, even though it is just that I who come and give lectures, but all their involvement is very important in making the course useful, interesting and worthwhile. So, at this point I want to make a disclaimer. So, I am going to talk about what is a phase field model and how to look at it and things like that. So, this is an overview of different points of view. Okay. Some of the points of view is what I have, some of it is not what I think, but those are existing viewpoints. So, I would like to give the complete picture, not just what I think, what other people think and how they look at it, because some of you might find that interesting, so might be interested in that part. So, I am going to give a overview of different points of view. And I also want to talk about the current challenges and trends a little bit, because the reason why one might want to do this course is to go beyond what is taught in this course and look at new problems and use the phase field modeling as a technique to solve problems that might come about in academic or industrial research or practical application problems. So, that is what we are going to do, and this overview is however very personal. So, this is what I think, and it's biased by what I know and what I haven't done obviously, and it's also not very comprehensive. This is not like a review where I have taken into account everything that has been done using phase field models. For example, we never had a chance to talk about phase field models of fracture, for example. Okay, so there are huge bunch of problems for which phase field models are being applied and models are being developed, but we haven't talked about them. So, there are lots of things that I am not going to talk as part of this. So, it's not complete in that sense, and it's going to be a little bit abstract. That is because we have looked at lots of phase field information. So, now we should be able to step back and look at things not in great detail, but as a overview. So, that is what we want to do in this part of the lecture. Okay. So, if you ask what is phase field modeling, there are many different answers that you would get. So, I have listed 4 representative answers, and I have also given what kind of researchers are having this kind of viewpoint. For example, mathematicians think that phase field modeling is an approach to obtain solutions for partial differential equations that are hard to solve. We have seen that you can look at the Cahn-Hilliard, Allen-Cahn kind of equations as some nonlinear partial differential equations, and when you put them together you have this highly nonlinear coupled partial differential equations. And now a priori we need to know if there is a solution, and so what is the type of solution and so on. So, it becomes very difficult to solve such ODEs if you pose them in the classical setting as sharp interface models, but because diffuse interface approach can give us equations which we can solve. So, more mathematically oriented researchers think that phase field modeling is basically an approach for solving PDEs. Okay. They think that there is an introduction of artificial region of continuity. So, even when there is discontinuity like a shock wave, for example, you replace that region of discontinuity by a continuous part, and then you ask what is the functional for which the Euler-Lagrange equation will give me this evolution equation, in which if I make the interface width go towards 0, I will get the classical evolution equation. So, this is how it is posed, and so phase field modeling is just looked at as a technique or strategy to solve partial differential equations. But this is very mathematical viewpoint, right. So, you think that actually there are discontinuities, and replacing them with continuous functions is just an artifact to make the calculation simpler or easier. The second one is of course very interesting. So, this is from biology, and the most important paper in this field was written by Alan Turing, who is a great computer scientist. He called it as chemical morphogenesis. So, it is available. If you Google, you might be able to find this paper. So, some of you might have seen that some of the structures that we develop, for example, during spinodal decomposition. So, we get these black regions and white regions in our representation, or blue regions and red regions, right. So, Alan Turing thought that Allen-Cahn kind of equations, which are reaction diffusion equations, because they are diffusion equations and there is a source term, and source term can be thought of as some chemical reaction giving rise to some species. So, these reaction diffusion equations can give rise to this kind of interesting patterns, okay, alternating black and white. So, if you look at some of the patterns on some animals like zebras for example, so Alan Turing thinks that these equations can now explain how these patterns are formed. Okay. Here again the emphasis is on the patterns that form. So, these PDEs are just thought of as tools to get such interesting patterns. So, this is another viewpoint on phase field modeling and comes from the field of biology. The third viewpoint is that you can think of statistical mechanics and you can think of problems in statistical mechanics that lead to interesting patterns, and what kind of coarse grained free energy that you can derive from the statistical models and then their minimization and during minimization how it evolves and things like that. So, this is a viewpoint. This is much more closer to the kind of viewpoint that we have, but this is more physics based viewpoint. Here again the importance is on the patterns and on statistical models. So, what kind of models lead to what kind of patterns. To the extent that we are talking about statistical models, statistical mechanics based models, we are talking about the physics. Of course, the approach that we took in this course is the last one. I have called it as the material science, or you can call it the metallurgy approach. This is the approach where we think that these are partial differential equations that describe diffusion, except that the constitutive law is no longer fixed law, because we also want to describe phase transformations or deformation induced microstructures. Okay. So, if you depending on what is the background or the person that you are asking this question, what is phase field modeling or what is the kind of problems that they look at, you will get many different answers. So, these are only representative answers, these are not exhaustive. There could be other viewpoints about phase field models, but we have taken the approach that phase field models are just some nonlinear diffusion equations, and that is a good viewpoint to take if you are looking at solid phase transformations. Okay. Now, having said that, so what are phase field models? So, here is an answer. So, models in which the time evolution of order parameters are described as partial differential equations. So, that is a definition of phase field model that you can use, because that is what we have been doing. We have been looking at the time evolution of the order parameters, and what do the order parameters do? They describe the microstructure. So, in this viewpoint, now order parameters are field variables. That means they have value for all positions in the domain for all times. Okay. And the typical characteristic of such a model is that the order parameter is constant in the bulk, and wherever it changes we say that there is an interface. Okay. So, this is a slightly more detailed answer to the question what is phase field modeling and from a materials point of view. Okay. Now, there are two canonical phase field models that one looks at. One is called the Cahn-Hilliard equation, which is the equation 1 here, and the chemical potential is what is defined in the equation 2. And this is basically because the concentration is a conserved order parameter. That is, if you take an integral of the concentration field over the entire domain, and if you differentiate it with respect to time, that is going to be 0, because the integral is going to be a constant C naught. So, d by dt of C naught is going to be 0. So, that wherever such a condition is obeyed, then we have to write the Cahn-Hilliard equation. On the other hand, the Allen-Cahn equation is non-local, it does not worry about conservation, because the order parameter is such that it does not have to be conserved. For example, you can have an order parameter which describes whether the system is solid or melt, but there could be situations where the domain is completely melt, and after a while it can become completely solid, which is what happens in solidification setting, for example. So, such physics is described using the Allen-Cahn equation. So, equation 3 is Allen-Cahn, and the chemical potential definition is what is given in equation 4. These two, Cahn-Hilliard and Allen-Cahn, are basically can be thought of as the prototype phase field equations, and you can think of any other phase field model to be a combination of these two. So, you can write this generic phase field model which will basically be a combination of these two, and which is what we have been doing for many different interesting microstructural phenomena. Now, you can compare the Korn-Hilliard and Allen-Korn equation with the classical diffusion equation, and here you can see that equation 5 is the classical diffusion equation, equation 6 is the Korn-Hilliard equation, equation 7 is the Allen-Korn equation. So, in terms of the structure of the equation, they look like nonlinear diffusion equations. The physics is very, very different, but in terms of the equations, they look like diffusion equations, nonlinear diffusion equations. Okay. Classical diffusion equation is just linear, but these look like diffusion equations with some nonlinearity thrown in. In one case there is a higher order derivative or gradient term on composition, in the other case there is just a source term in the order parameter f of e. So, because they look like this, that also gives us an idea that solution methodologies could be the similar to what is used for solving the diffusion equation, and specifically in this course we have actually used the spectral technique for solving the phase field equations. Okay. Now, here is the recipe which we have been following for every problem. So, it consists of about 4 steps. In all the things that we did in this course, we actually saw 3 of them, and the 4th one we did not have a chance to look at. The first is to describe the microstructure using a field variable. So, that could be conserved or non-conserved. The purpose of this order parameter description is to describe the geometry of the microstructure. Once you have defined the geometry, for the given geometry you have to describe the thermodynamics. That is done by giving the free energy or entropy in some cases, but we have been sticking to free energy functional because in solid phase transformations, where most of the times we are assuming that temperature is a constant. So, isothermal problems, this is a very good thermodynamic description. And then we take the variational derivative of the free energy, and we write this constitutive law which says that rate of change of the order parameter is proportional to the gradient in the chemical potential or proportional to the chemical potential itself, and this some part of it we have done. For example, when we write the Korn-Hilliard equation, that there is mass conservation is also incorporated into the equation. It could be more complicated than that. For example, you might be looking at a stressed system, then you have to solve the equation of mechanical equilibrium, right, or you might be looking at some magnetic or electric or electromagnetic system, then the Maxwell's equations have to be solved, and those field variables have to be incorporated into the free energy, the magnetic free energy or the electric free energy or the elastic free energy. So, sometimes the phase field models will be coupled with these other physics that is involved, and then it becomes more complicated. So, one of the very common problems that people use extensively is to look at the effect of elastic stress effects on microstructures. There we have to solve the equation of mechanical equilibrium, and you have to get the stresses and strains, you have to calculate the free energy contribution from these stresses and strains, and you have to put it back into the free energy, calculate the corresponding chemical potential. Then the evolution will be very different from when you neglect these stresses, because stresses play a key role in the microstructural evolution. So, that is the 4th step. We did not have much of a chance to look at it, but if you want to do anything which is complicated, sometimes you might end up with having to incorporate the 4th step also. Now, what are the characteristics of the phase field model solutions? We see that the interfaces are not sharp. Okay. So, you always have a very diffuse interface, and we can also track the interface without having to look at where the interface is. That is because you can say that wherever the order parameter becomes half between the two bulk, then that is my interface. For example, if my order parameter goes from 1 to 0, wherever 0.5 value is reached for the order parameter, I will call that as an interface. So, there is a operative definition for the interface which you can use, and so when you are doing the calculation, you do not have to keep track. You also do not have to keep track because it is not a sharp interface which has discontinuities, in which case you have to incorporate some jump condition at the boundary, but because we are assuming everything to be smooth continuous, we do not have to incorporate any jump condition, which is all automatically incorporated. Now, we have also discussed the relationship of the higher order terms, the gradient terms in the free energy to the interfacial free energy. Okay. That means any interfacial free energy related effect will automatically come into play in the phase field models. Gibbs-Thomson is an example. We looked at how the composition changes, for example, for a curved interface. So, they are automatically accounted for, you do not have to do it manually. And because we do not track interfaces, if there are interfaces which are merging or splitting, all that is automatically accounted for in these models. Of course, like I mentioned, if you have elastic fields or magnetic fields, electric fields, they all can be correspondingly included into the model by incorporating their energy contribution to the free energy. So, that way, I mean, phase field models have some advantages over other models that one can use for looking at the same physical phenomena. Now, what are the challenges? Of course, you have noticed that there is no the phase field model. For example, we have looked at order parameter based grain growth model, where we used a scalar field phi, but we know that different grains are described by their orientation. So, you can use the Euler angles as the order parameters, and their variation can, for example, describe the microstructure. Yes, it is possible, as long as you can use these order parameters and write the free energy in terms of order parameters and their gradients, you should be able to do. And similarly, this is something that we have not discussed in great detail, but becomes important if you look at the literature, is that we have assumed everything to be isotropic. Even the grain growth case, interfacial energy was assumed to be isotropic. It need not necessarily be so. Okay. So, interfacial energies could be anisotropic, and anisotropy can play a key role in the microstructure. In which case, how do you incorporate the anisotropy is one of the important problems, and there are methodologies that are being developed, including in our group here. So, there are many different ways in which you can incorporate the anisotropy into the model, and there is also the problem of making connection between the phase field models and experiments. One of the reasons why phase field models are being studied in this great detail is because they look at microstructures, and from an application point of view, microstructure is the bridge between the processing and the property. So, if I have to get some property, I need to know what processing does to my microstructure, so I know whether I will get the property or not, and phase field models are the models to do this microstructure part. So, which means we need to at some point connect our models with experiments. In that case, of course, there is a connection at the thermodynamic level. So, there are programs like CalFAD, which is for calculation of phase diagrams. So, can we take those thermodynamic information and incorporate in our models, and where do I get information about the gradient energy coefficient? Is there a way to get it from some other models or some other information and the mobilities? So, there are lots of parameters. In addition, the microstructure itself, the geometric information itself can also be used as an input or as a benchmark for the phase field output, in which case the experimental microstructure information could be quite complicated, could be quite costly in terms of storage. So, how do you make this connection is one of the problems on which there is lots of effort that is being spent at the moment. Of course, there is also the question of thermodynamic consistency. In the case of solid-solid phase transformations, we demand free energy and its minimization. In cases like solidification, where temperature is not a constant, one may have to look at entropy functionals, and there are formulations like grand potential formalism, which becomes important in such cases to look at. So, these are some of the challenges associated with order parameters and thermodynamics. There are also other challenges in terms of what parameters go into the phase field model and why, and how do we obtain them from, if not from experiments, from other modeling techniques like atomistic models. Can we get the parameters, put it in the phase field model, do the microstructure, get the microstructural information, put it in a finite element model. So, these are the type of questions which become important, especially if we have some application in mind. So, in those cases, then how to get these parameters and how to make different models talk to each other becomes an important problem. So, there are lots of effort that is being done at this moment to answer some of these questions or to make progress on some of these questions. Okay. Of course, the last problem about which I want to talk about is that we have been looking at solid-solid phase transformations. One of the other important ways in which the microstructure changes is by mechanical deformation. Okay. So, deformation induced microstructures and their modeling is very important. That means, like we have done phase transformation part using the phase field model, can we do plasticity part in the phase field model? So, that becomes an important question. The difficulty with plasticity is that it is very complicated. There is more than one mechanism and they might all be competing, or they might all be interacting with each other. So, this how to bring it into a phase field model is a very crucial question, and it is also a very challenging question. And of course, apart from this, there are other challenges like large calculations we want to do or parallel calculations we want to do. For example, in some scenarios spectral techniques are not very good for scaling in terms of parallel computation. Then we need to do finite difference kind of models. How accurate are they and how better can we do this? So, these kind of other computational issues are also things about which we have to think about if we want to do large scale or application oriented phase field models. So, that brings us to the summary. So, one can think of phase field models as some non-classical partial differential equations. They are ideal for the study of microstructural evolution. We have seen several examples, but the formulations and parameters is not yet mapped out completely. So, there are many problems that are not yet solved, and one can solve if one can formulate it properly. And there are issues related to the formulation, which is basically the math associated with the problem, the material science associated with the problem, and the numerical methods associated problem. Okay. So, there are lots of open problems, which means that it is a field which is growing, alive and kicking, and anybody who wants to do, and especially because there is a wide variety of problems that one can tackle, more mathematical problems, more materials oriented problems, more physics oriented problems, and more computation oriented problems. So, they all have their relevance and they are all interesting, and so I hope that this course helps you to start in this direction. I hope that this course is a starting point for you in this journey. Thank you.